Good morning. I have a big handicap. I don't speak Norwegian. I can do this in Dutch or in French as well if you prefer, but I was told English is perhaps the best. I will speak only about PDFA. I saw the whole interesting presentation about all of the different file formats that the archive here deals with, but my talk will only be about PDF and more specifically PDFA. And what I'll try to do is give you some more details on where it comes from, what it is, why it's a good thing or not, what the different flavors are, and what some of the complexities are that come with those flavors. I will do my best not to speak too quickly. I'm afraid I spent quite a bit of time in the US, and that gives you a little bit of a faster speaking mode in English. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, either in English or in Norwegian, in which case translation will be provided, because my knowledge and my understanding of Norwegian is as bad as my pronunciation here, so I will not do that. So, what we're talking about is kind of this, where we want to create something and then we want to save it for a certain period of time. And in the old days, everything was simple. You took a piece of stone and you carved something in it that was hard work. But once you did that, it actually lasted for a pretty long time. You just had to take care not to drop it and break it, I guess. But as long as you're dealing with stone and paper and you have to store these things, physically store them somewhere, but it's all quite easy. Of course, today we deal with electronic documents rather than something that you carve in wood or in stone or write on paper. And of course, everything is easier when you deal with electronic documents. We all know that. And when I talk about archival and some of the problems on the electronic side, I usually take the same example. Long ago, I studied physics, and at the end of that study, you have to write a paper that nobody reads afterwards. But anyway, you have to write that, and I wrote it in 1994, and I looked back and looked at which software and hardware I used in the process, and I was a little bit of a geek then. Probably still today. So I had pretty good modern stuff to do this with. And I used MS-DOS and Windows for workgroups at the time, which sounds very old now, but was very modern then. I also used WordPerfect. I just saw a very nice picture of it. That's a long time ago since I saw that. And a very new version of Word for Windows, which was excellent, except that it printed different on the two different printers I used, which was kind of annoying. And saved that on floppy disk. You remember? I didn't really have the big ones, the ones that were flexible. I had a small 3.5-inch floppy disk, and I had it backup on a very modern backup mechanism, iOmega zip disk. I think it had like 100 megabytes on the disk or something like that. Amazing. I still have the floppy disks. I can't read them anymore because I have no computer that has floppy disk reader at this point. Plus, they're 18 years old, so I guess there is probably not that much on them anymore. It's magnetic after all. I still have the zip disk. I can't read that either because I don't have the reader anymore. And I'm pretty sure if I had that stuff, and I do have the files somewhere in some other electronic archive, but if I looked at those files today and I tried to open them, chances are that I would not be able to open them, or if I would be able to open them, they would not look the same as what they looked like back then. This was a pretty complex document with tables and images and lots of content and formulas and things like that. And the chances that it looks completely different today are actually pretty substantial. So when people talk about archiving and ask what the big problem is, I ask them to use their imagination and think, this is about 20 years, not even ago. If you think about how our world will look like 20 years from now, or 30 or 50 years from now, it's not actually that easy to imagine what kind of technology we will be using. look back 20 years and realize that the internet just started back then, and that nobody understood what cell phones were. You went to a phone and it had like a cord to it, and that was it. We made pretty amazing progress in the last 20 years, and that only increases. So creating something today that you can guaranteed open 50 years from now electronically is not that easy to do. Now, why 50 years? What kind of periods are we talking about? And in the previous presentation, it was said infinity, which in many cases is actually how long you want to store documents. But depending on the type of document and depending on the country you live in and what kind of business you're in, you're talking about all kinds of different time periods. If you're talking for Belgian companies, if you're talking about direct tax documents, and we have quite a few taxes, then you're talking about 5 years. Value-added tax is something different. It's 7 years. Documents regarding health issues for employees, you have to store for 15 years. So already there you have quite a substantial period for any business that they have to save documents for. If you look at it, a different market segment, if you want, and you look at what engineers are doing, well, if you build a bridge or if you build a building, you want the maintenance documents and all of the drawings and everything that you create to last as long as the bridge or the building so that you can properly maintain it. And then you're easily talking about 50 years, 100 years, several hundred years for some structures. And libraries, archives, you want to digitize something today and store it in an archive, and you want to be able to open it any time after that. So that's quite a challenge. And as was indicated again in the previous presentation, one of the first steps in the right direction was 1993, when a company, small company at the time called Adobe, or a little bit bigger today, small company called Adobe invented something that they called PDF, Portable Document Format. And they invented a number of software solutions to work with that, like Adobe Reader to read it, and they had creation tools to convert PostScript into PDF. And that PDF file format was very good for a number of reasons. And originally it was conceived by Adobe for use on the internet, but then also used for electronic documentation, an electronic manual that came with software, for example. But there were a number of groups that very quickly started to look at the advantages of PDF. And most of my background is in pre-press and graphic arts, working with printers and publishers, and that's one of those groups that started dealing with PDF very, very quickly. But if you think about PDF in an archival kind of way, then it has a number of characteristics that make it a very good basic format. First of all, it's a page description format. It focuses on the visual representation of something. Not so much on the structure that is in there, like HTML or XML or even many of the Office document formats, but it focuses on how does this page look and how can I make sure I can represent it in exactly the same visual way in different systems, on different printers, and so on. It is printer independent, and that means you don't have the problem that Word often has, that if you take a document to a different computer and a different printer, that lines will break differently or pages will break differently. It is platform independent. I can create something on my Mac and someone on a Linux machine or a Windows machine will be able to open it, and it will look exactly the same, no differences. It's a very compact and a very complete format, and those are two very different things. Compact because the PDF file format by itself implements a whole range of compression technologies that you can use on the different parts in there. You can compress images with JPEG compression, there is support for zip compression, in terms of lossless compression for text and so on. All of that is foreseen and embedded in the PDF file specification. It's complete because it makes it possible to store all of the things that come together with the document in the actual PDF file. All of the images can be in there, all of the fonts that are used can be in there. So you end up with one very easy to use file that you can send to someone else that has all of the information it needs, and that will be represented identically to what you created on your system. And on top of that, and also important for archival scenarios in many cases, it's random access. And what that means is if I have a document with 5 pages, I can open it up and I can very quickly go to page 5. There is no dependence on the previous pages in the document. Now, if I only have 5 pages and I have a modern computer, that's not a big deal. If I have 1 million pages in a PDF, and we've seen many scenarios where that is actually the case, then you can still go to page 972,513, and you'll get it as quickly as in that small document, because the file format, the PDF file format, was constructed in such a way that all of those operations are very easy. There is another important aspect, and that is a more recent development. But if you look at PDF, I said this was originally a file format created by Adobe. That's a commercial corporation, and stuff that is created by or owned by a commercial corporation is not necessarily good for a standard. You want something that is under the control of a standards organization. And Adobe worked with the ISO to transfer the ownership of the file specification, PDF file format, to the ISO. And it became ISO standard 32000, which means that the actual PDF standard by itself is now a standard. The file format has been standardized and is developed further by the ISO, not by Adobe as a private company. Okay, so PDF is the whole solution, and we can go home and don't have to learn about all of the problems in PDFA, right? Well, unfortunately, there are a couple of things that can still go wrong if you're looking at a PDF file. And that's true in all of the different markets where PDF is used. It's a very good file format originally. It's also a pretty complex file format, and it allows a whole range of things because it is used in different markets. If you're looking at archival, there are a range of things that you can do with a PDF file that you don't want to do in an archival scenario because they could cause problems. I said PDF is a complete file format. You can embed images, you can embed fonts. But the PDF file format doesn't force you to embed those fonts. I can perfectly well create a PDF that doesn't include those fonts, and that counts on the fact that the font will be available on the system in order to render the file correctly. That's not what you want. And it's the same for a whole lot of other features in that PDF structure. The other problem, and that is also a really big problem, is that not all PDFs are created equally. Adobe creates a whole lot of PDF, but there is a whole range of other technology with which you can create PDF files. And not all software vendors are equally well at following a 1,000-page manual that says this is how you should create a PDF file. So if you look in practice at what you find on the internet, for example, there are quite a few PDF files that are broken, that don't follow the rules, that do stupid stuff inside. It's amazing what you find. The problem is you probably don't ever see that because Adobe Reader, for example, is really, really good at opening bad PDFs. They just fix whatever is in there and they don't notify you, they simply make it work. Again, in an archive scenario, that's not what you want. You want files that obey very strict rules because 50 years from now, Adobe Reader might not exist and you might have some other software and it might not be as good in opening broken files, or it might fix them in a different way and you still end up with something that looks different. So that's not what you want. In short, PDF by itself is a very good basis for an archival standard, but it's not good enough by itself. What you need is what became ISO PDF-A. ISO PDF-A, as it is depicted here, is really a subset of PDF. The ISO committee that developed this looked at the PDF specification and said, okay, so if we think about PDF in the context of archival, what are the good bits? And we're going to save those. We're going to allow people to use those. And what could cause problems? And let's forbid people to use any of the features that could cause problems. It's a standard, again, developed by the ISO and maintained by the ISO. And if you have to describe it in one sentence, it is designed to remove ambiguities from the PDF file format. Anything that potentially could cause problems is simply forbidden, or you are instructed to use it in a very specific way so that it is very clear to anyone who reads a PDF-A document how that particular feature, even though it might be complex, how that particular feature has to be implemented. And one of the interesting things, and one of the very unique things, is it's also an ISO standard that will never expire, because the idea is that you can take a file today and you can convert it into PDF-A, and then that will remain valid into eternity. Now, of course, ISO is a standard organization. It would be too simple to create just one flavor of PDF and stick to that, of PDF-A and stick to that. But there are actually good reasons of creating different flavors. They're called conformance levels from a technical point of view. Flavor is a nicer word. And the reason they created different flavors is because you have different archives. And in different archives, you have different needs for the files that are in the archive. So what they did was they created, in the original PDF-A version, PDF-A1, they created two different flavors. PDF-A1B, the basic flavor, and then PDF-A1A. That's very hard to pronounce a couple times after each other, but I'll do my best. PDF-A1A, why the A? Well, you can either think of advanced or you can think of accessible. Both actually are a good way of remembering it. What's the difference between the two? And I'll illustrate that in a little bit more detail, but basically PDF-A1B, the basic version, focuses only on visual representation. Meaning, if I have a PDF-A1B file, a basic file, then I want to be able to open it on my system now, or print it out on a printer now, and I want to be able in 50 years from now to open it or print it, and it has to look exactly the same. I don't care about anything else. I don't care about any of the meaning in the file. I don't care about any of the structure that is or is not in the file. I'm only interested in visual representation. What you see 50 years from now has to be exactly the same as what you see today. That's all. That's difficult by itself. There are a lot of rules in PDF-A1B that tell you what you can use and what you cannot use and how you should do things. But it's only the visual appearance of that file. If you look at PDF-A1A, it has all of the same limitations and demands that the 1B flavor has. But on top of that, it also includes a number of rules that talk about the meaning of the document. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is a very nice document about Paris. There is an Eiffel Tower there, which is readily recognizable for most people. And if I want to save a PDF-A1B file, then really what you see there is all I'm interested in. If I can reproduce that picture and the text that is there 50 years from now, I'm happy. I don't need anything else. I'm not interested in anything else. If I think about PDF-A1A, I'm also interested in that visual reproduction or representation, but I'm also interested in meaning. And that means, for example, first of all, that all of the text that is in there needs to be encoded in a proper Unicode compliant way so that it can be extracted and it's searchable, and I understand what that text is. I'm not only interested in the visual shapes of each character and the fact that those shapes are rendered the same, I'm also interested in knowing that that first letter I have up there is a P, and I have to be able to extract that first line there as Paris. It's the Dutch way of writing Paris, but anyway, it's Paris. So the text that you have in a PDF A1A file needs to be encoded in a specific way. There are rules as to what you need to do, how you need to write that text and have it in the PDF A file in order to be compliant to the standard. That's one. Secondly, in one of those files, I'm interested in structure. And structure means, just as in Word, where you have different paragraphs and you have columns and you have a table, and it's clear in Word what that is. I mean, a paragraph is a paragraph. Once you go to a PDF file, you don't necessarily have that information anymore. In a PDF A1A file, that information needs to be there. There needs to be an identification of the different parts of the document, and there needs to be structure information for those different parts. For example, the fact that Paris there is a document title, and then you have a number of paragraphs on that page. And that is very important when you start thinking about accessibility, for example, or extraction of texts in the right reading order, with the right level of the right paragraphs, or being able to extract a table and do something meaningful with that table. That structure is very important for that kind of those kinds of features. And lastly, so we're at two. First was fonts, and second is structure. Lastly, in PDF A1A, you also need to do proper tagging of the different elements in that file. And that is important, and what is there is an example. Almost everyone will recognize that that's a picture of the Eiffel Tower. Probably 50 years from now, you'll still recognize that. Maybe. Let's hope it's still there in 50 years. But that's kind of universal. The fact that this is a picture of the Eiffel Tower that was taken just after the Second World War and has a specific meaning is something that is not that obvious. And if you want that information to be preserved, because it was important in the context of this document, you have to store that information in the file. And tagging gives you a way of attaching that kind of information, context information or meaning information, to those elements in the file that are visual elements, like images. Right? So we have text, we have structure, and we have tagging. Now, if there is so much more information in PDF A1A, then why wouldn't you just always create PDF A1A files? They're much more usable. They allow things like extracting text. They allow things like searchability in a very good way. Think about an archive. It's useful in an archive to know what that image was specifically. Well, the reason that 1B standard exists is because it's much easier to make. That's basically it. If you have 1 million documents, and today they are PDF or Word or whatever they are, and you have to convert them into PDF A in order to store them in an archive, converting them to PDF A1B is actually quite doable. It's an automated process, or it can be an automated process. PDF A1A, that's a different story. If you need to add structure information and tagging to each of those files, that's going to be a manual process. It's very hard for an automated process to understand what different paragraphs are and tables, and it's almost impossible for an automated process to attach meaning to images in those files. That's something where someone, a human, is going to have to look at those files and is going to have to do work on it. Or you're going to have to set up the process in front of it, the original documents, in such a way that they have all of that information and that it is conveyed correctly into the PDF A1A file. So let's do something very short here that shows this in a little bit from a software point of view. What I have here is one particular software application from Calus that does conversion from regular PDF to PDFA. And what you can see in the lists is, and focus on the bottom because I haven't talked about all of the other nice stuff, what you see in the bottom here is PDF A1B, visual reproducibility, and then you see PDF 1A. Now, the document I have open happens to be a real property tax document from somewhere in the US. I happened to find on the internet. I'm not sure it was supposed to be there, but it was. This is just a PDF file. I downloaded it from the internet, good PDF. So what I can do is say, I want a PDF A1B file, and I'm going to execute that. It's going to ask me to save that, so fine, we'll call it 1B. And then it does some magic and stuff behind the scenes. Basically what it's doing right now, of course, is taking all of those rules that are implemented in the PDF A standard in that document and checking all of the objects in the file, all of the content in that file against those rules. And if anything is wrong, it will tell me this didn't work and give me a list of problems. In this particular case, it does work, and you see that there has a small label appeared now at the bottom of the screen that says this is a PDF A1B file. Everyone's happy. Totally automated, a little bit of magic behind the scenes, but I didn't do anything but press a button. Okay, so that's good. That's what I promised. So let's take that document again, and we'll do the same thing. But now we're going to say, well, but if it's that easy, I want 1A. And as you can see here, 1A identifies itself as visual reproducibility. That's the same thing we just did, and semantic, which means meaning. And we're going to do the same thing. And again, it asks me for a new name. More magic going on behind the scenes. And oops, something flashed there, but it disappeared again. And what you can see now is that in this particular case, I didn't get a PDF A1A file. So apparently it's not that easy. So let's go to report and see what the problem is. And you can see that it fixed some things, but mainly what I want to focus on is these three things, because they correspond directly to everything I've shown you on that nice picture of Paris. Text cannot be mapped to Unicode. That talks about, is the text in the document included in the document in such a way that it can be extracted later, and that I still know what the meaning of that text is. Well, in this particular document it's not, and it's not something apparently that can be fixed automatically in this particular case. So that's a bit of a problem. Structured PDF, that's the second thing we talked about. Remember, what is the document title? What are the different paragraphs in the document? That information is not present in that PDF I downloaded from the internet, and that is not something that is very easy for an automated process to simply recreate based on the original PDF. So in this case, if I wanted that structure, I would have to find a manual process to take that PDF and insert the structure. Or I would have to go back to the original application that generated that text return and modify that so that it now generates structure in the PDF it outputs. And then MarkInfo talks about the third thing I showed, the information about tagging for images in that particular document. So, in short, if you think about PDF A and you think about which flavor to use in a particular workflow, realize that the 1B version in general is kind of easy to make. The 1A version has a number of additional demands that are very, very useful. But useful comes with a price, and the price is that the conversion step is typically much more difficult, or you need much more information to begin from. So what I said was that the PDFA standard, and I talked about one version and two flavors, 1B and 1A, is a standard that will always remain valid, and that is the case. That, of course, again, in a standards process, things change just as they change in the real world. And what the ISO committee creating PDFA has done is come up with new versions of that PDFA standard to keep up with the changes in the rest of the world. And as the previous presentation already said, there are now 3 different versions of PDF-A. You have PDF-A1, A2, and A3. I'm not going to go into all of the details. I know that, for example, Olaf will talk about a little bit of the specifics about A2 and A3, but I do want to give you the highlights here. PDF-A2 was invented, first of all, to keep up with some of the changes in PDF itself. PDF was invented in 1993, but since then it went through a whole evolution and it invented all kinds of very interesting features. Also for archival. For example, the fact that you can now use JPEG 2000 in modern PDF files is something that is interesting because JPEG 2000 in general offers better quality and smaller compression than the traditional JPEG compression that was allowed in older versions of PDF. So PDF-A2 is an update to the PDF-A1 standard that allows these modern versions to be used. Secondly, there is support for embedded files, and the embedded files need to be PDF-A files themselves. What does that mean? I can create a PDF-A file, and inside that PDF-A file, I can store additional PDF-A files. I can use that PDF-A kind of as a container for other content. And that is useful in many archival scenarios because often you want to keep documents together. I could make something where I store all 10 parts of an engineering drawing, for example, together in one master PDF-A file. Remember that what you store in there, if it's PDF-A2, needs to be a PDF-A file by itself. So I need to create PDF-A versions of all of the different components, and then I need to embed those in a master PDF-A file. And then the third thing that changed was because 2 flavors was a little bit on the low side, they invented a third flavor, and for some reason it is called PDF-A2U. I get confused. So it's the letter that they used is U, and the U comes from Unicode. In reality, and this doesn't sound very well alphabetically, but in reality it's somewhere in between A and B. Remember that you had 1B, and that's quite easy to make, and 1A is very difficult to make because you have all of these structure and tagging stuff you have to put in the PDF file. Well, it turns out in many cases that from the 3 things you need for a PDF-A 1A file, correct text in Unicode, structure, and tagging, 2 of them are really hard, the tagging and the structure. The third one, making sure that the text is there in Unicode, is usually much easier to do, and it also has a lot of value. It offers text extraction and searching and so on. So that's U flavor in PDF-A2 allows you to create a file that does everything that 1B does, so everything that the B variant does, and on top of that, it also encodes the text as proper Unicode. And that gives you something that is still quite easy to make, but is searchable and offers you that text extraction and so on. So it's an in-between, compromise. If you look at A3, and again, Olaf has good examples of that, I think, but if you look at A3, where I said previously that all of the embedded files needed to be PDF-A files by themselves, that is no longer the case in A3. That means you can take something that is not a PDF-A file, perhaps not even a PDF file, and you can embed it inside of a PDF-A3 file. And I only give 2 examples. I could take an email and I could convert the email into a PDF-A3 file. And then I could take all of the attachments to that email and simply dump them inside that PDF-A3 file. And now I have a PDF-A3 that I can archive, but I still have access to all of the original attachments, which may be all kinds of other different file formats. And of course, nothing stops me from embedding the original version of those attachments and also embedding a PDF-A version so that I have the best of 2 worlds, if you want. Another example would be I could take an Excel file and I could convert that Excel file into a PDF-A3 file and then embed the original Excel file inside that PDF file, which gives me something that is archivable and that I know for all eternity can be opened and read and printed. At the same time, if I still have access to a version of Excel, I can extract the original Excel version and look at the calculations that happened in there, for example. So it's a way to store both the long-term archival, but at the same time not lose any of that short-term information. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I'll just start with one question. Structure is really important in PDF or PDFA. Do we have support for structure in like modern Office formats? Do Word support structure in a good way, and PowerPoint and Excel and those softwares?
They have structure because they have, if you edit text in Word, you have a concept of a paragraph, because if you type, the paragraph wraps around lines and so on. It's not having structure information available in the native document that is difficult. Word has that, PowerPoint has it, InDesign, Illustrator, almost any text editor has it because it's an essential feature of a text editor. The problem is, how do you make sure that that structure that you have in the Office document or in the InDesign document or whatever it is gets converted over into the PDF file in the correct way so that you still have it there, and that's not always that easy to do.
Okay, but a good PDF conversion tool would do that from, for instance, a Word document?
Yes.
Okay. Further questions? Yeah?
You were saying that PDF, all PDF formats are ISO compliant. Is that correct?
PDF by itself is now an ISO standard. So most of the PDF versions that you hear about that are used today, like in graphic arts, we still use PDF 1.3. That is a version that goes back to Acrobat 4. So goes back to 1999 or something like that. That is an Adobe format. That is, Adobe wrote the spec. There is a big book, I don't know how many pages, but there is a big book with that standard, or with that file format, and that is not an ISO standard. That is something that Adobe wrote, and that is property of Adobe. What Adobe did at some point, and I forget the actual year, but they transferred ownership of the PDF file format to ISO, and ISO turned it into an official ISO standard. And that is ISO 32000, that's the number it received, and from that point on, it's an ISO standard. But all of the older versions are not necessarily ISO standards.
So this was PDF 1.7, the internal version number, so this was the basis for the ISO 32000 standard.
I'm just worried about the fact that we see users every day that have a problem because they haven't been told the definition of what is ISO approved, or the quality required, or
but part of the process
what they should store.
I mean, if you have a PDF file today, wherever it comes from, if you want to store it in an archive and you want to store it as a PDF-A file, you're going to have to do checking whether it's in the right format and conversion if it's not in the right format. So you're going to convert it from, just as I did here in the example, you're going to convert something that is a regular PDF file. My example was probably a PDF 1.3 since I downloaded it from the internet. You're going to convert that into a PDF-A file. And during that conversion process, what that tool will do is make sure that that PDF-A file uses only features that are allowed by that ISO standard. So by definition, once you do that, you turn it into something that is ISO compliant. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. Once you convert it to PDF-A, it will be compliant to that ISO standard.
I think it's also very important to know that the file format itself is ISO compliant. ISO 32000 doesn't mean that all the files which are made in that format will be available or accessible with the original meaning in the future. Right? Because you can still make a ISO 32000 compliant file which does not have fonts embedded, where all the images are located on the internet, where all the color profiles are located on the internet, and which will make problems in the future. Right?
So PDF, whether it's an ISO standard or not, PDF by itself is not enough for what you want to do in an archival scenario. You really need PDF-A as a base level. You need some form, some version, and some flavor of PDF-A. That's the only thing that guarantees you that PDF file is written in such a way and structured in such a way that there are no ambiguities, and that 50 years from now you'll be able to read it in the same way.
Yeah.
If you have a PDF A1A format file, how can you access the structured information?
There are different tools that allow you to do different things with it. Any tool that understands PDF and that understands structure in PDF would at that point be able to do things like extracting the text. Do you know, Olaf, whether the Acrobat tool itself uses structure when it does things like save to RTF and Word?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So that would be one way of doing it. If you open the file up in Acrobat and you say save as RTF, and you have structure, then the quality that you get out will typically be much better than if there isn't any structure in that file. But it's embedded in it's embedded in a standard way in the PDF file. So if I wanted tomorrow to write a tool that doesn't use any Adobe technology or anything else, but just a tool that opens up the PDF file and does something with that structure, I can do so. All I need is the ISO standard for PDF, and that will explain me how it is embedded in that file. It's really open and make sure that any vendor that wants to do anything with it can actually do that.
There are also tools available for universal accessibility, for instance for the blind, which will use that structure and make meaning of the document for those people. Otherwise you will get some text in the middle of the page first and then the title and blah blah. So there's no real meaning for those who can't read.
And that's something I haven't talked about, but there is an ISO standard that is called PDF UA, Universal Accessibility, that focuses on, not on archival, but focuses on making documents accessible for people with disabilities. And much of the things that you care about in an archive in terms of meaning and structure and tagging are also directly important for that standard, because it's the same type of information that is, for example, used by a screen reading device to read that PDF aloud afterwards. So the more meaning you have and the more information, the more you go towards a PDF A1A file, the better that file will also be in an accessibility way, if you want.
Yeah.
So PDF-A is a restriction on the PDF format.
Yes.
And then you have PDF-X, which is also a restriction on the PDF. Could you tell me the difference between them?
There's a whole letter soup. There is PDF-X, there is PDF-E, there is PDF, VT, there's probably a couple I forget now. What happened is you have PDF, and that's now an ISO standard, and then different markets made a different subset of the PDF language for their own use. PDF-A is a subset that is specific to archival, and all the features that are relevant in archival, and anything that is dangerous in archival is not allowed. That's how that standard came to be. PDF-X, the X stands for blind exchange. Exchange, it's a bit of a stretch, but and that was, again, a standard, an ISO standard that was developed not by the archival community, but by graphic arts community, printers and publishers. And they did the same thing. They actually did it first. It's the first ISO standard that was built on top of PDF. They restricted the PDF format to anything that makes sense in a workflow where you want to take PDF files and you want to give them to someone else to print. The intention was, and that's where the blind exchange comes from, the intention was, if I'm a graphic designer and I do all kinds of cool stuff here on my computer, and I print it on my little office printer and it looks great, then I can create a PDF-X file and I can throw that to my printer, And he will print it on a big Heidelberg press that takes a whole hanger. And it will look exactly the same because it is a PDFX file. And I can exchange that without having to tell him what he has to do or how he has to process it. So it's different because the rules are different between PDFX and PDFA, but the concept is exactly the same. It's built on PDF and it restricts the PDF file format to a subset that makes sense in that particular market. Just the same as PDFE restricts it for the engineering world, for example.
Okay, Thomas?
So this also depends on the workflow, so it's not so complex. So you can have PDFX to print a nice flyer, and if you obey some minor rules, then this is identical to PDFA. So from the workflow, you first produce your brochure printed, and then obviously you may want to store this as a PDFA file in the archive.
So what are allowed in PDFX that are not allowed in A? I mean, what makes a PDFX file dangerous to archive?
Yeah.
Almost nothing. There's a few technicalities that would not be allowed. That you can do in PDFX that you are not allowed to do in PDFA, and I will not even try to explain it. It's very small detail. 99% of PDFX files can easily also be saved as PDFA files. And there's actually organizations doing it on a regular basis. For example, the EU Publication Office had the task to both provide printed material from the EU, but also to archive the material for a very long time, not only whether for eternity or just hundreds of years. And they produce files all the time that are PDFX and PDFA at the same time, the same file. You don't have to have two files. So as a rule of thumb, you can say you can turn every PDFX file into a PDFA file. But you cannot turn every PDFA file into a PDFX file. For example, if you have interactive forms, you can have them as PDFA, but it's not possible right away to also have PDFX files.
Someone there?
Yes. You said during your lecture that there exists a lot of tools out there creating bad PDF files. Acrobat being able to open them nevertheless. But can the same be said about validators? Can we trust validators? Does there exist good validators and bad validators out in the market today?
Okay, it's all software, and software is not exactly known to be bug-free 100% of the time. Okay, however, in the case of PDFA, there are actually a number of test suites out there that you can use to validate whether a validator is correct. So a tool to validate the validator, if you want. And the other thing, of course, and that is the case for PDFA, it's also the case for PDFX. Yes, you have a number of different tools out there. It's very easy to use a number of those tools on the same test set and see whether they give you the same result. The test suites that were created specifically creates or contain specific files to test whether specific features and restrictions and so on in PDFA are indeed reported the correct way and are found by all of the validators.
Tony from the Norwegian National Archives didn't want to say what they plan on using, but does the PDF Association or PDF.no or some organization recommend something? They have to perform all the tests individually.
I can recommend tools, of course, but that would not be very objective, because I happen to work for one of the vendors for one of those tools. So, okay. I think the answer that was given before is much more correct. If you go to the website of the PDF Association, there is a list of all of those tools. And really the way to decide in many cases is not so much which tool is the best validator, because they should all be the same anyways. The standard is the same. The validator should be the same and at least give you the same results when you run them on actual files. Mostly it's a matter of looking at the feature set. What can the tool do? And in my particular workflow, what do I need? I mean, am I talking about only PDF to PDFA? Am I talking about Office documents to PDFA? Am I doing scanned document, paper documents to PDFA? There are all kinds of different scenarios that you can encounter in a workflow, and you have all kinds of different tools that deal with those and focus on those different scenarios. So you really have to make a list of what it is that you want in terms of feature set, and then go to the PDF Association website and see what tools are available and try those that match with the requirements that you have. So it's not like I can stand here and say, well, this is the best tool. I mean, no, it depends on what you want to accomplish. It also depends on things like the volume that you're dealing with. Is there integration required with a database or another system that you have? There is a whole set of different requirements that you can have.
May I add that in the PDF Association throughout the last 6 years by now, I think, the vendors in the association that are offering some kind of validation tool have worked very hard together to increase or to maximize what I call inter-instrument agreement, so that whether you take one validator or the other, the result will be the same. It will not be 100% because it's software, unfortunately, but it will be as close to 100% as we can go. And if you really want to play it safe, you just grab 2 validators and try them on the same material. The situation was not perfect in, let's say, 2007 or 2008, but by now even vendors who compete aggressively talk to each other to make sure that the validation functionality is more or less identical. And it's then the feature set that's different, whether you want to use it on a server or desktop or what kind of file. But I can really say that the inter-instrument agreement is really good compared to validation tools in other fields.